leadership does come down to influence, and in ways that, men couldn't use it because they were women. Like you think of Jackie Kennedy. I always think of her trips and like what that did for the U.S. image abroad, and how she used that to her advantage and did stuff that her husband could never even do because she had a unique feminine position to be able to bring that perspective to what that looked like.
All right. Well, today I'm joined by Dr. Lisa Maracine. I wanted to say Maracine. I almost tripped it up again. But I'm super excited to have my dear friend Lisa on the show today because we've known each other for what turns out to be almost 20 years. Is that right? We met at Westmont College. And Lisa's experience is crazy. It's taken her across the globe. It's taken her to the United Nations, Capitol Hill, and Congress. She's been on remote islands speaking to women on the radio waves. You might have heard her. And also even in the inner city streets, working with a lot of philanthropic projects that her family does there. And her latest project was, I guess this isn't that recent, is it?
Yeah, not anymore.
Like, she was actually in India. And is that where you met David, your husband?
Yes, that's what brought us together.
I know. So she was on a really cool, tell us a little bit about that. What was that trip like? Because I know that was part of your microfinance project, right?
Yeah, so spent like 6 weeks there, and it was my first time to India, but I've always wanted to go. So it was an exciting thing that I got to commit to and be part of. It's called a Smart Village project in India. And basically at the core, it's kind of bringing technology and infrastructure to villages. It started with one village, and now it's kind of spread across to different ones. But it builds off of the idea of a smart city. So it addresses, like the one that we did was 5 different areas where they need help the most. So I was brought in to focus with the entrepreneurs that are doing artisan-based business. So the saris, that are traditional craft that's been passed down through generation.
That's like the really pretty dresses, right?
That all the Indians wear.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes from the villages and their families that make it. And they needed help getting it to their customers instead of going through a middleman, which ends up not giving them really a fair price for it. So we helped them cut out that middleman by getting it directly online and able to connect with customers that way.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you went kind of from there to finish your master's, right?
And my PhD.
I know
that was during the PhD.
Oh, it was during the PhD. Okay. Yeah. She's a smarty pants, guys, if you didn't catch that. So what is your PhD in?
It's in global leadership.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. It's like I planned it for you to be on a leadership podcast. Yes. I would love for you just to kind of share why you decided to get your PhD in global leadership and kind of what was the motivation behind that.
Yeah. So the foundation and core of the program is like organizational leadership. So I think people might be more familiar with that as a concept. But the global leadership is what really appealed to me because it brings in a lot of different cultural voices and different ways of doing leadership, different styles of leadership instead of one traditional way. But I love the program because it's not your typical PhD program where it's really heavy on theory. It's setting you up to become a tenure track professor. It actually pulls in people doing all sorts of different things in the marketplace and in the world so that they can just have a more educational foundation and more theory that they can use in their workplace, but they're not all going to teach necessarily. They're going out into the world to do different things.
Right. And I remember when we got out of Westmont, I got to kind of watch your story evolve and, the evolution of, even when you were working with 31 Bits, and that's, for people who don't know, is a jewelry company where it made, does it still exist? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just shifted in some ways.
Well, back then it was making these incredible jewelry pieces that were actually really, really pretty, really on trend. But with using the African styling of beading and paper products?
Paper.
Yeah, and it was amazing because it was like very on trend. This is like 10 or 15 years ago. And but they had found this way to make these products that were easy for people to make in Africa, but would really appeal to a Western audience. And I thought that was such a brilliant marriage. And then I kind of saw you go to do your master's and your PhD, and now you're a professor. And so I would just love for you to share, why did you kind of choose to go? Because there's so many leadership directions you could have gone. Politics. And we were just joking about how we went on a political science trip in Sacramento back in, I don't even know what year this was.
2005
2000, 2005 or 6, where we were I don't even we don't remember what we were doing. So sorry, Dr. Lawrence, because we probably didn't learn what we were supposed to learn. But I do have this distinct memory of the smell of the Capitol. And so I'm like, you could have gone, though, that political direction. Your dad worked in politics, like, doesn't currently, but like ran for office. Like, so why did you decide to go more higher education?
Yeah, well, I've always loved working with young women and mentoring them. So there's a lot of volunteer work that I got to do growing up and through college, working with young women. And that like just really easily became my heart and my focus. And that's what led me to a lot of the jobs that I took, like with 31 Bits. It was very focused on empowering women, both as consumers and as producers. So making sure that we connected people who wouldn't normally be connected, but also making it to where they can find sustainability along the way. And I felt like it was such a cool new area that I had never heard of before.
Yeah.
That took it so much further than just your typical charity or philanthropic stuff where you give away stuff, but actually gave them a tool that they can provide for themselves. Yeah. And didn't need us in the long run. That was the goal.
Sustainability. Yeah. I think that was a really novel concept when we were coming, college, when we were coming out of college. And now, thankfully, it's spread and it's more widely accepted. But I remember thinking the same thing, like, why don't we do sustainable business instead of just donation-based charity work? Yeah.
And actually, you'd be surprised. A lot of college students still haven't heard about a lot of the companies that are doing it differently.
Really?
So they're really familiar with fair trade and fair wage and all of that, but they don't know about the kind of stuff that I was doing. So being able to teach that and share stories and show them, hey, you can actually do this with your life and not be stuck in like what you think of as traditionally the way that success looks like with whatever field you're going into. They love that.
So you like cultivating the young minds.
Yeah.
It's just transferred over. Yeah. Now you got to collect homework and do that kind of stuff and make sure they're doing their job. But well, one of the things I'd love for you to share about is like what is something, and I think we've been around the block now a few years out of college and stuff, but what's one thing that you think people misunderstand about women and women leaders, or you as a women leader you have experienced yourself? Like what's a misunderstanding about women in leadership in your view?
I think when we think of leadership, it's really through the traditional adjectives that we use and what that looks like, and even like what we see as power and how we define power. And it's always through a really masculine lens. And so even with some of my papers I got to do in the research, I loved redefining power as feminine and what that could look like in the workplace. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, even coming down, because I love fashion. So I'd always connect it back to that and what that
we do have to talk about this.
Women in leadership, like how they use fashion to communicate. But a lot of times it's really traditional masculine looks that seem powerful. So I loved being able to redefine that in a lot of the work that I did.
What did you learn when you were researching fashion diplomacy? Because I remember that project and I was like, that's so cool. Like, but what did you find out like through that project?
I think just how powerful a tool it is in communicating things. If you think, obviously a lot of it is within the political sphere of how women use it, or even designers, like, they dress first ladies, and that sends a statement. And especially like at the certain dinner, like if they're wearing this designer, and what does that communicate? Is it an American made designer? Like those kind of things play a big role. But even like taking it a step further, like, Madeleine Albright, she used pins to communicate things that was like her thing, like brooches, which is kind of like different. Like our generation,
like our grandmas, that was more their vibe.
And she's definitely on that side of things. She passed now, but she, like, that kind of thing was used throughout like fashion diplomacy. You can find a lot of research on those things.
Okay, now are we seeing a change in that direction? Do you think of like women dressing more femininely and still maintaining power?
Yeah, I think it depends on the industry for sure, because there's still really like traditional ways of doing stuff, and it's hard to get out of that. But I think you can still people use fashion all the time to communicate things.
That's so fascinating. Well, you guys will have to check out her work on that. We'll see if I can find a link to it or something. I'd love to hear, you talked about Madeleine Albright, but are there female leaders that you admire, and like why do they draw your admiration?
Oh, there's so many. I think even like obviously some that aren't with us today, but like just historical figures too, like Eleanor Roosevelt and people that have made such a huge difference in like even when you think about women not having the right to vote, and yet she helped pave the way for that. But even more so, they were able to use their influence. I think leadership does come down to influence, and in ways that men couldn't use it because they were women. Like you think of Jackie Kennedy. I always think of her trips and like what that did for the U.S. image abroad, and how she used that to her advantage and did stuff that her husband could never even do because she had a unique feminine position to be able to bring that perspective to what that looked like for leadership.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of mine are political, but there's so many within the church too that I so admire.
Yeah.
Obviously Lisa Bevere is one that really,
we share her as a
really
friend
inspires.
and mentor, and yes. Do you think like specifically with influence, like what's the difference between power and influence? Do you think?
Yeah, I think everyone has influence at some level, and that's kind of what I try to communicate to my students, because a lot of them don't think they're leaders in the sense of the word of how they think it's defined.
Right.
But you have influence. I mean, I think now when we think of influence, we think of influencers
Yeah.
because of social media.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's...
If you put your booty on TikTok, you can have some influence, but that's not what you're referring to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even just like if you're an older sibling, like you have
Right.
influence over your younger sibling at the most
Right.
basic level. Everyone has some type of influence. But power, I think, maybe more so connects to a position that you hold, and not just everyday influence that you have.
Yeah, so you have influence over your students, but you also to some degree have power because you're their authority.
The authority in the classroom.
Right. Well, I was wondering if you could share too a little bit about just like how we as women like need to assert that leadership, and like do you yourself consider yourself a leader? Because I think a lot of times when I talk to women, I'm like, oh, you're a leader. They're like, oh, I'm not a leader. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, but I'm curious, like, would you use that term to describe yourself? And if not, or if so, why?
Yeah, growing up, I never would have.
Yeah.
Never would have said I was a leader in any way.
It would have felt weird, right?
It would have, yeah. It wasn't, yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think just in the church, I think you see the picture of leadership in a certain way, and if you don't fit it, then you're not a leader.
Right.
And I definitely had like small leadership roles, maybe like with student council or stuff like that, but I still wouldn't see myself as a leader.
But that showed early signs of leadership in you that you wanted to be on student council, right? So, and I think we don't celebrate or nurture sometimes that within ourselves, or sometimes I don't think it's called out too. Like, hey, you realize you are a leader because you're seeking leadership roles, whether that's being a team captain on your team, or like being a coach, or being a tutor or mentor to a younger kid if you're a middle schooler or high schooler, right? Like that's all still leadership.
Yeah, I think even just teaching anything, a skill or anything to someone, you're a leader. In
mothers are leaders.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, for their children. So do you see yourself as, would you use that term now?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I see myself as a leader.
Yeah. When did that shift happen, do you think?
Yeah, I think, being maybe put in leadership roles, that definitely helped, like really formal leadership roles, whether that was a youth leader after college, or just having the title of a director in some job or something. But especially as I came to know myself and my calling and what I was called to do in this world, I definitely saw that through a leadership lens, but uniquely to what I think I'm called to through a feminine leadership lens and not a traditional one.
When you say that's what you're called to, like, how would you describe your calling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can change through each season, but at the core of it, like, my calling is to equip and empower and encourage, especially young women, that they have a unique place in the world for such a time as this, and calling that out of them in a way that maybe they haven't seen before. So I think even you could even reframe it and say, like, just even showing them how they are leaders in whatever they're doing.
This is something I think a lot of people who are young or like, in their 20s, I know this is something I struggle with in my 20s, post-Westmont, of like, I want to change the world. Right. I'm going to go make a huge difference. And then I go and sit in a cubicle, 8 hours a day, not doing what I think is making a difference. How did you come to arrive at figuring out your calling?
Yeah, I think it definitely started by serving. I'm sure you could say the same with your journey, but getting outside of my comfort zone and even outside of like what I thought success was after college. What I did didn't even connect to what I studied, and that was really
what
disappointing.
Was your degree? I don't even know.
Science.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Oh, duh. That's why we were on that trip.
Yeah, it was an international focus. It definitely connects now, but at first it didn't.
I thought I was going to the UN. Like
Right?
you actually went to the UN.
I actually did. Yeah,
I
so
literally.
that came true.
This is a side note. I want you to finish what you're saying, but I remember saying like, I will never work in American politics.
Oh, no.
And at Westmont, like I will never. And then like literally like the recession hit 2008 and I got a job working at the state capitol here in Colorado, and I was like, I'm working in American politics. But anyways, okay, so back to you
Don't
though.
say never.
Yeah. So you weren't working in what you thought you were supposed to study.
So I actually went into like full-time ministry. I was on staff at a church.
Oh, that was a U-turn.
Different shift. Yeah, which has its own politics in some ways.
Indeed.
Which you would know too. But that became like my training ground because I learned so much. And actually that opened my eyes to understanding just as a woman and how I experience even ministry, but also everything else. I never thought of things through gender lens before that time. So it really allowed me to explore that and find my calling and go through a lot of things too that I had to experience for my own personal development. But at the end of the day, it was like a lot of volunteer work and doing things outside my job description and just diving into that season, even though I desperately tried to get out of it. And it lasted longer than I thought because I kept applying to my master's program. I got rejected like 3 times.
You did?
Yes.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. But I knew I was supposed to be there.
Really?
So it was definitely more about the timing and God lining it up.
How did you overcome that feeling of rejection? Because that took leadership over yourself.
Yeah, that's tough. At first, you kind of doubt. Well, at least I doubted. Like, did I actually hear from God on this? Because I knew I was supposed to go there and do that program specifically. And I just every time I got rejected, God would be so faithful and just so clear to say, no, you're here. I still want you here, and that's in your future. And just what it was something little. Like driving to work one day and right in front of me is a USC license plate, which is where I ended up going, which you don't see very often. I was in another state. Just being so clear that, yes, I'm leading you to this. And even like on an airplane coming, this guy handed me this scripture reference and I looked it up and I was like in tears because it said, is anything too hard for me? That was the scripture. Wow. And at that point I was like, God, I literally have done every single thing to get into this program, whatever it was to improve. I was like, I don't know what else to do. You're just going to have to open the door. Wow. And so I think it's like that process of surrender and knowing, hey, I can't actually do this on my own in any way, shape, or form. So God, you have to open the door if I'm supposed to be here. And he did eventually. It took a minute. A little bit longer than I thought.
That's hard. I mean, I definitely know, like, I came out of Westmont thinking, like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to work in an anti-trafficking organization. And it was the recession and there was no jobs. And I remember flying out to D.C. I had a friend that worked in the agency. I had a friend at IJM. I actually met the vice president of IJM on a Young Life trip. And I was like, okay, this is all going to work out. And then I went to them and they were like, yeah, you need to go to law school. And I was like, what? And then I went and I tried to take the law school exam, bombed it, which Becca will judge me, or my friend Becca, who's now a Department of Justice lawyer. But I just was like trying to figure out what to do. And like, I think for me, I didn't feel enough conviction about doing law school, but it's interesting knowing for you, like, you had to go through overcome those rejections and overcome those setbacks and then still persevere through it. And if you hadn't done that, you wouldn't have your PhD. You wouldn't be teaching women, and men, and definitely getting to mentor in the way that you're getting to do now as a professor. So I love hearing that. I didn't actually know that about your story. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't.
Yeah, I share that with students too, because I think it helps because everyone faces rejection and it's not always a sign of you're going the wrong way. Sometimes it's about timing.
Right. So how does your faith inform your work now? Like, obviously you're in a secular university environment. It's not really something you can be super pushy about. But like, how do you bring that to being a professor?
Yeah. So it's kind of exciting because it's like you can't talk openly about Christian values or just my own faith, but I do share some things. And a lot of, like, obviously you were one of my guest speakers. I bring in guest speakers that love the Lord and have strong faith. Sometimes they share, but no matter what, those values get communicated.
Right.
And it opens the door for more conversation too. And it definitely informs how I even like shape my curriculum and my syllabus and what values I want to instill in them. And a lot of them, like I really care about their personal development. And for them, that kind of translate into obviously what they're going to do after they graduate, but their own career development too. So making sure that they know they have someone and a safe place while they're exploring during their college years to go to for advice, and even just someone that can help them. Because a lot of times they don't get that from anyone else in their life.
Right.
So just being that open door for them creates a lot of opportunities to share a lot of the values that I have with my faith.
It's just being being present, right? It's just showing up for them every single day, and then also just being like a listening ear, because I know that can be a very tumultuous time of like, who am I? What am I doing? And I can only imagine with the pandemic and with the economy the way it is, like the stress that, you know, young people are facing today, I think is similar to what we did coming out in 2008, but it's different because, I mean, there was no social media like to the degree. Yeah. There was no, I mean, there's a lot more outside pressure. I'm curious, like I had one question written down of if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell her? But I think I'm also going to say, if you could talk to a current 18-year-old today, like what would you tell her if she's wanting to become a leader, if she's looking at your life or your story and going like, man, how do I do what Lisa did? How do I navigate all that?
Yeah, I think one, I kind of said it, but just trust the timing of your life, especially from a faith perspective. Trust.
I love that.
That God knows the timing. And sometimes it's really just, at the end of the day, not about you. Like, it's the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You have, like, God's timing. He's putting all these things in alignment in his kingdom. And whether it's getting another degree or fulfilling a job position, like you're going to be there for a certain time to fulfill a greater purpose. So trust that. And it's really hard because things don't go according to what you think they should.
We've both talked about our marriage timing much longer
than we thought.
Thought. How old were you when you got married?
31.
Okay, I was 32 or 33.
Close.
Yeah. We were like, this is a decade later than it was supposed to be, God.
Right.
But it was perfect timing, and it was the right guys. I mean,
that's the important
I mean, there's some Westmont boys, which I don't think it would have been a good call.
No.
They're all great, but they've all matured now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, how do you balance motherhood with all this? Obviously, you're leading at the school, and then you're having to come home and be a mom to your now almost 2-year-old William, and then, you know, obviously wanting to grow your family, and like, how do you juggle kind of these roles and these responsibilities of wife, mom, professor, daughter? You know, you guys are really involved in your community and your church. Like, how do you juggle all that?
Yeah, I think it's understanding what your season is. And if you don't understand, it'll kind of come at you.
Yeah.
And you'll be forced to understand.
That's the truth.
So motherhood is really like more challenging in different ways than I thought it would be.
Okay.
But that's like my priority right now because I'm just in the little season. So spending as much time as I can, but still like being able to balance, like having I just work part-time. So I go 2 days a week. So there's always mom guilt, but you just, like, I know what I need just to thrive in both settings.
Right.
And being able to have the help to do that. We have a cousin that helps us, and he's going to go to preschool. So, like, those kind of things, just building them in. And then just knowing when to say no to other stuff. Like, I just don't have the capacity to do a whole lot more right now. And that's okay. Like, I can't.
You're not a youth leader right now.
No, I can't be super involved at church, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's such a good way of saying it, because I think a lot of times women feel like they need to maintain balance. Like, oh, I need to be an excellent housekeeper. I need to make amazing meals. I need to like take my husband on dates and like make sure he's like, you know, feeling loved. And then I also have to make sure my kids are perfect, and I got to be great at work. And I think it just becomes so
too much,
overwhelming. Like, you literally can't do it all. You might be a like not as great employee for a season, but then you're going to become a great employee again. Or you might just be not showing up as well as you want to be showing up for certain roles in your life, but it will evolve again. And that's what I hear from a lot of people, especially even older people than us, who are like, this is how I went from, you know, young wife to mom to now grandma. Like, all those seasons of life shifted. And I think that sometimes the mistake is getting set in your way of thinking, this is how I have to onboard everything equally. And
it doesn't work that
try
way.
to look like, you know, celebrities in Hollywood who have nannies and chefs
they have a lot of
and
help.
personal trainers and, you know, assistants. And I mean, I remember living in Santa Barbara and finding out that people had house managers, and I was like, what is that? Like, did you know what?
No.
Okay, so like a house manager is someone who literally just does your house, like gets your mail,
Wow.
Takes your dry cleaning, picks up, ships your Amazon stuff back. I'm like, that's a dream.
Yeah, all the little things.
Yeah,
takes time.
Exactly. So, well, I'm loving this conversation. I'm wondering, like, how do you, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, is there a leadership rule you live by, and what is it, and what would you tell other people about it?
I think just playing off of the influence thing, I think we all just understanding that we all have influence, and it sounds kind of creepy, but there's someone always watching, so you have to just like be on like 100%.
I'm thinking of that old song, Private Eyes. Private Eyes.
Oh, that's creepy. No, but you don't realize, even with social media, you don't realize who's following along, and in a positive way.
Yes.
Like that you could be encouraging, and that's like come back around to me in so many times. I didn't even realize I had influence over this area,
so good.
And yet I had a huge impact. And someone will email me later, or they want to connect, and like that's like I think at the core of leadership. So understanding what influence, maybe you don't see it, but just being really aware, and even living to that high standard and living with excellence, no matter what you do, because no matter what, people are seeing you and you're a reflection of Jesus.
I love that, because I think you don't realize, it is kind of weird, like whether you have 500 people on your Instagram or 50,000, like in what generation could you reach 500 people like every single day, or even 50 people every day?
Right.
You maybe, our grandmas and our moms maybe reached the 10 people they worked with, or the 20 people, or their household, or their church community, but you weren't, like, the way people are networked now, there is influence. And if you only have 200 Instagram followers, 10 of those, or even 10% of those, could be really impacted by you. And so I think I love the idea of that influence is always there, even if you don't have a position of authority yet, or whatnot. I think I have one last fun question for you. So obviously you're a busy mom, you're a professor, like you're doing all these things. What is something you do for fun, like that's just for you? Like when you're wanting to be selfish, like shut out the world, like, whatever. What's a one fun thing?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out. Like it's like hard sometimes.
A hobby.
I love fashion. So like even just going to a store and like having time to look around, like Anthropology is my favorite.
Is it?
And I get inspired.
Okay.
So like doing that is like a dream.
Okay. Just go to Anthropology by yourself.
Yeah.
Like no
Spend
husband,
time.
no William.
Yeah, exactly.
Wander around. Okay. Do you have like a favorite like item of clothes, that since that's like one of your passions? The headbands?
My headbands.
Yeah, it's your signature look.
Yeah, I wear them all the time now.
It's so funny because the home edit like is where
she wears the same brand.
Does she?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like that headband is everywhere now.
Yeah, she loves it too.
Okay. Well, you and maybe.
Well, yeah. Well, it became popular, I think, because of all the Zoom calls. People wanted to feel put together. But I always loved headbands. And then I found this brand, and I just love it.
What brand is it?
Lili Sadugi.
Okay. Well, if they want to sponsor the podcast, we'll have Lisa sport your headbands.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciated this. I think it's going to really be helpful to people. Where can people find you if they want to keep up with you and just, see what you're doing?
Yeah. So my Insta is Lisa Maracine, just all one.
Okay.
It's private because I share a lot with my son, but I like, especially young women, I just like, that's my heart. So I'd love to connect with you there. Okay. And then LinkedIn is always great too, because I keep updated on all my professional stuff there.
Cool. Well, if you guys want to go and get your master's degree or get an undergrad degree, I guess too, you can.
Yeah. I teach undergrads.
Okay. You can go with Dr. Maracine.
Yay.
Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.